When Jason Clark boarded his flight that fateful day, he expected nothing more than a routine journey, a few quiet hours to relax before returning to his duties. What he didn't expect was to be met with cold stares and subtle hostility from someone tasked with ensuring his comfort and safety. From the moment Jason stepped into the first-class cabin, Lauren Taylor, a flight attendant with an air of superiority, made it clear that she doubted he belonged there. What began as dismissive glances and veiled comments quickly escalated into blatant disrespect. Lauren's bias was as unmistakable as it was unsettling, leaving Jason to quietly endure the kind of discrimination he had faced too many times before. But what no one on that plane could have predicted was that the man Lauren underestimated would soon become their lifeline in the most critical moment of their lives. Before we dive into this gripping story of courage, redemption, and transformation, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you're inspired by this story of perseverance and change, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss out on more compelling tales like this one. Jason Clark stood in the crowded terminal of Kennedy International Airport, his tall figure and poised demeanor subtly standing out amidst the bustling crowd. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, he exuded an air of quiet confidence. Jason was a man in his early 40s, with a wealth of experience as a commercial pilot, though today he was merely a passenger, ready to enjoy a brief respite from his busy schedule. As he moved toward the first-class line, his leather carry-on hung casually from one shoulder, revealing a faint glimpse of his pilot's license tucked into an outer pocket. The familiar scent of jet fuel and the faint hum of overhead announcements brought a nostalgic smile to his face. Flying had always been more than a profession for Jason. It was a lifelong passion, a calling. At the front of the line stood Lauren Taylor, a blonde flight attendant in her early 30s with a pristine uniform and an air of authority. Lauren had a reputation for being efficient, though her demeanor could lean toward haughty. Her piercing blue eyes swept over Jason, narrowing slightly as she took in his presence. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice laced with subtle condescension. "Are you sure you're in the right line? Economy boarding is over there." She gestured behind her with a smug tilt of her head, her gaze lingering judgmentally on his polished watch and crisp suit. Jason met her eyes, his expression calm and unreadable. Without a word, he handed her his boarding pass. Lauren snatched it with a sharp click of her manicured nails against the paper, scanning it quickly. Her eyebrows twitched upward briefly before she forced her features into a tight scowl. "I see," she said curtly, thrusting the pass back at him with little regard for politeness. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Clark." Her voice was icy, and as Jason moved past her, he heard her mutter under her breath, "Guess they're letting just anyone fly first class these days." For a moment, Jason froze, his shoulders tensing at her words. But with a small shake of his head, he continued down the jet bridge, choosing not to dignify the comment with a response. His silence wasn't born of weakness. It came from years of experience dealing with moments like this. Behind him, a group of flight attendants clustered near the gate desk, whispering among themselves. A young male attendant with kind eyes frowned, leaning toward a colleague. "Did you see that?" he asked softly. Lauren was way out of line. "Shh," the woman beside him replied, her voice low and cautious. "You know how she can be. It's not our place to say anything." Jason entered the plane, his steps steady despite the lingering discomfort from the earlier exchange. The cabin's familiar atmosphere enveloped him, a mix of plush leather seats, ambient lighting, and the low hum of the engines preparing for takeoff. He had spent countless hours in cockpits like the one behind the locked door ahead. The temptation to reveal his credentials and set Lauren straight flitted through his mind, but Jason dismissed it just as quickly. Today wasn't about proving anything. Today was about rest. Finding his seat easily, Jason stowed his carry-on in the overhead compartment before settling into the luxurious leather seat. The whispers and curious glances of other passengers didn't faze him. He closed his eyes, taking a long, calming breath as the plane began to fill with the chatter of boarding passengers. Lauren appeared in the aisle shortly after the seatbelt sign was switched off, her demeanor suddenly professional and cheerful as she began the in-flight service. She pushed a cart laden with drinks and snacks, her saccharine smile directed at the elderly couple seated across the aisle from Jason. "Good afternoon," she chirped. "What can I get for you today?" Jason watched her from the corner of his eye, his face neutral. He knew what was coming. As Lauren reached his row, her practiced smile vanished, replaced by a look of disdain. Without making eye contact, she dropped a napkin and a plastic cup of water onto his tray table. The water sloshed over the rim, droplets splattering the napkin. "Thank you," Jason said evenly, his tone polite despite the slight twitch of annoyance tightening his jaw. Lauren didn't reply. She turned away with a derisive snort, moving on to the next passenger. Further down the aisle, Ethan Perez, the young attendant with the kind eyes, watched the exchange with a troubled expression. He hesitated, as if debating whether to intervene, but ultimately returned to his duties. When he passed Jason's seat, he offered a quiet, apologetic glance. "I'm sorry about this, sir," he murmured. Jason gave him a reassuring nod. "Don't worry about it." Around the cabin, other passengers had begun to notice Lauren's blatant hostility. An elderly woman leaned toward her husband, her voice a disapproving whisper. "Did you see how she treated that gentleman?" she asked. "It's shameful." The man nodded, frowning. "Someone ought to say something." Jason, however, remained calm, his attention drifting to the low, steady vibration of the engines beneath the plane. Years of navigating bias and misunderstanding had taught him that confrontation often did little to change hearts and minds. For now, he focused on what mattered, keeping his composure and enjoying the flight ahead. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test more than the mechanics of the plane. It would test the character of everyone aboard. As the plane ascended and reached cruising altitude, the cabin settled into a comfortable rhythm. The passengers busied themselves with books, screens, or quiet conversation. For Jason, it was an opportunity to unwind, but the tension in the air was hard to ignore. Lauren continued her in-flight duties, weaving through the first-class cabin with a faint brightness that contrasted sharply with her earlier demeanor. She chatted amicably with passengers, offering drinks and snacks with a practiced smile. But her interactions with Jason remained clipped and impersonal. Seated across from Jason, the elderly couple observed Lauren's behavior with growing disapproval. "It's not right," the woman whispered to her husband, her wrinkled hands resting on his arm. "She's treating that man like he doesn't belong here. How can someone act like that in this day and age?" Her husband shook his head but said nothing, his frown deepening as he adjusted his glasses. Further down the cabin, Ethan Perez noticed as well. The young flight attendant had been keeping a close eye on the situation, though he hadn't yet gathered the courage to step in. His internal conflict was evident in the way his brows furrowed and his lips tightened each time Lauren brushed past Jason with another dismissive gesture. When Lauren approached a well-dressed woman in her 50s, her saccharine tone returned. "Can I get you anything else, ma'am?" she asked sweetly, leaning in slightly. The woman glanced toward Jason, her expression conflicted. "No, thank you," she said quietly, her eyes darting between him and Lauren. Lauren's smile turned into a smirk. Lowering her voice, she murmured just loud enough for the woman to hear. "I didn't realize they were giving out first-class seats in charity raffles these days." She punctuated the remark with a quick glance toward Jason. Jason, who had been sipping his water, nearly choked at the comment. He placed the cup down carefully, his jaw tightening as he stared straight ahead. The restraint he showed was remarkable, but inside, frustration simmered. The well-dressed woman's eyes widened in shock, and though she opened her mouth to respond, Lauren had already moved on, leaving behind a trail of discomfort. Nearby passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered to each other, their hushed tones betraying their unease. Others averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved. Jason's focus shifted inward. Years of experience dealing with bias had taught him how to maintain his composure, but this time felt different. He was thousands of feet in the air, with no escape from the situation. Still, he refused to let Lauren's words define him or ruin the journey. Ethan couldn't remain silent any longer. As he passed Jason's seat, he leaned in slightly. "I'm really sorry about her behavior, sir," he whispered, his voice low enough to avoid Lauren's attention. Jason gave him a small, appreciative smile. "It's not your responsibility," "But thank you," he replied evenly. The interaction didn't go unnoticed. Lauren, standing a few rows ahead, caught sight of Ethan speaking to Jason and frowned. Her lips tightened into a thin line as she turned away abruptly, busying herself with adjusting the drink cart. Despite the awkward tension, Jason maintained his calm exterior. His quiet dignity didn't go unnoticed by the passengers around him. Some began to cast sympathetic looks his way, while others seemed emboldened by his composure. The cabin fell into an uneasy rhythm, punctuated by occasional turbulence. Jason leaned back in his seat, letting the gentle vibrations of the aircraft soothe his thoughts. Minutes later, a brief announcement crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your co-pilot speaking. We're expecting some light turbulence ahead, so please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Lauren re-emerged, her tone cheerful as she addressed other passengers. Though her demeanor toward Jason remained frosty, her every interaction with him seemed to drip with disdain, as if she couldn't reconcile his presence in first class with her own prejudices. Ethan continued his rounds, offering assistance with quiet professionalism. He refilled drinks, provided headphones, and checked on passengers, but he couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him. His own silence earlier felt like complicity, and the guilt gnawed at him. From across the aisle, the elderly couple whispered again. "Someone needs to do something," the woman said firmly. Her husband gave a resigned nod. "Maybe it's not our place, but it's hard to just sit here and watch." Meanwhile, Jason tried to distract himself by flipping through the in-flight magazine. His calm facade belied the turmoil beneath. Memories of past encounters with discrimination flashed in his mind, moments when he had been doubted, underestimated, or outright dismissed. He had risen above them all, but the sting never fully faded. Unbeknownst to Lauren, her behavior had begun to attract more attention than she realized. A young woman seated near the front discreetly pulled out her phone, angling it to capture snippets of the flight attendant's movements. Her fingers flew across the screen, likely composing a post for social media. The businessman seated a few rows ahead shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes flicking toward Lauren before returning to his laptop. His avoidance spoke volumes. He, like many others, was choosing silence over confrontation. Jason, for his part, chose to remain above the fray. He had no intention of letting Lauren's ignorance provoke him. His focus stayed on the steady hum of the engines and the promise of a peaceful flight. But as the minutes ticked by, the situation aboard the plane was about to take an unexpected turn. One that would put not only Lauren's prejudices, but everyone's true character to the ultimate test. The plane continued its journey through the skies, cruising smoothly at 35,000 feet. Jason remained in his seat, exuding a calm demeanor despite the palpable tension in the cabin. Lauren's dismissive behavior had not gone unnoticed, and the atmosphere in first class felt heavy with unspoken judgments and discomfort. Jason glanced out of the window, the vast expanse of clouds reflecting his thoughts. He had long learned the value of silence, of not letting others' prejudices define him. Lauren's actions were just another in a series of challenges he had faced throughout his life. But this time, it was different. He couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play. Nearby, Ethan Perez moved through the cabin, his every action careful and deliberate. He made it a point to offer Jason a warm smile whenever he passed by, a subtle yet meaningful gesture. Though Ethan was hesitant to confront Lauren directly, he seemed determined to make Jason feel seen and respected. Lauren, meanwhile, continued her rounds, her interactions with other passengers dripping with exaggerated sweetness. Her tone was warm and inviting as she spoke to a couple traveling for their anniversary, and her laughter filled the cabin as she exchanged pleasantries with a business traveler. But when she approached Jason, her demeanor shifted abruptly. "More water?" she asked, her voice clipped, barely glancing at him. "Yes, please," Jason replied evenly, meeting her gaze with calm composure. Lauren refilled his glass with an exaggerated flick of her wrist, spilling a few drops onto the tray table. She didn't apologize, instead moving on as if nothing had happened. Across the aisle, the elderly woman from earlier had had enough. She leaned over to her husband, her voice hushed but firm. "This is disgraceful," she whispered. "That young man doesn't deserve to be treated this way." Her husband nodded, his frown deepening. Someone should say something, he agreed, though his own discomfort kept him rooted in his seat. The tension continued to simmer, but Jason refused to let it faze him. He focused on his breathing, the subtle rise and fall of his chest keeping him grounded. Years of navigating moments like these had taught him that confrontation was rarely productive. His silence was not an act of submission, it was a statement of self-control and dignity. Unbeknownst to the passengers, trouble was brewing behind the scenes. A sudden jolt of turbulence rattled the plane, eliciting gasps and nervous murmurs from the cabin. Jason instinctively gripped the armrests, his pilot instincts kicking in as he assessed the movement. Moments later, a shaky announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your co-pilot speaking. We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The reassurance did little to calm the growing unease among the passengers. Jason's sharp eyes caught a flight attendant hurrying toward the first-class galley, her face pale with worry. She huddled with Lauren and Ethan, speaking in hushed tones. The captains collapsed, the attendant whispered, her voice trembling. "He's unresponsive. The co-pilot is trying to manage, but he's overwhelmed. We need to land as soon as possible, but with this turbulence." Lauren's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. Ethan looked visibly shaken, his usual composure faltering. Jason had heard enough. His years of experience told him this was no ordinary turbulence. Rising smoothly from his seat, he approached the group with purpose. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm a commercial pilot with over a decade of experience. Let me help." Lauren turned to him, her expression a mix of disbelief and indignation. "You?" she scoffed, her earlier disdain bubbling to the surface. "This is a real emergency. We can't take chances with amateurs." Jason met her gaze steadily, his tone unwavering. "I assure you, I'm no amateur. Every moment we waste puts everyone on this plane at greater risk. Let me help." Ethan stepped in, his voice tinged with urgency. "He might be our best shot, Lauren. The co-pilot needs assistance." Passengers nearby, who had overheard the exchange, began to chime in. "Let him help," one called out. "If he says he's a pilot, we don't have time to argue. Do something before it's too late," another added, their voice tinged with fear. The rising panic seemed to sway Lauren, though her reluctance was evident. She hesitated, her internal struggle clear on her face. But Ethan didn't wait for her decision. Grabbing the intercom, he called the cockpit. "This is Ethan from the cabin crew," he said, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. "We have a passenger who claims to be an experienced pilot. Should we send him up?" A tense silence followed before the co-pilot's strained voice came through. "If anyone on board has flight experience, send them up immediately. We need all the help we can get." Ethan turned to Jason, his eyes filled with hope. "Sir, please follow me." As Jason moved toward the cockpit, passengers watched in tense silence. Some murmured words of encouragement, while others clasped their hands in silent prayers. "Good luck," someone said softly. "God bless you, sir," another added. Jason nodded in acknowledgement, his focus already on the task ahead. Lauren trailed behind, her face a storm of conflicting emotions, fear, anger, and the beginnings of doubt. When the cockpit door swung open, Jason stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the chaotic scene. The captain lay slumped in his seat, unconscious, while the co-pilot struggled to maintain control amidst the flashing lights of warning systems. "Thank God," the co-pilot breathed, relief washing over his face. "Are you the pilot?" Jason nodded, already moving toward the vacant seat. "Jason Clark. A commercial pilot with 12 years of experience. What's our situation?" The co-pilot quickly briefed him, his voice tinged with desperation. Jason listened intently, his hands already moving across the controls with practiced ease. "First things first," Jason said calmly. "Let's stabilize our flight path and get out of this turbulence. Then we'll contact air traffic control for an emergency landing." As Jason took charge, the cabin crew watched from the doorway, their earlier skepticism replaced by awe. At that moment, the dynamics aboard the plane began to shift, though the crisis was far from over. The cockpit hummed with the sounds of warning alarms and the tense breathing of the co-pilot as Jason took his seat. The flashing lights across the instrument panel painted a vivid picture of the challenges ahead, but Jason's calm presence immediately brought a sense of order to the chaos. "All right," Jason said, his voice steady as his hands moved expertly over the controls. "Let's level this bird out. What's the status of our fuel and position?" The co-pilot, a young man barely in his 30s, rattled off the details, his voice still strained. "Fuel is sufficient for another 2 hours, but we've drifted slightly off course due to the turbulence. The captain collapsed without warning, and I've been trying to regain stability while finding a suitable airport." Jason nodded, his sharp eyes scanning the readings. "You've done well holding things together so far," he said, offering a brief but genuine reassurance. "Now, let's work together to get everyone on board safely to the ground." In the cabin, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The passengers, aware that something was amiss, sat quietly in their seats. Some whispered to one another, exchanging worried glances. Others simply stared at the cockpit door, their expressions a mix of hope and fear. Ethan Perez moved through the aisle, doing his best to maintain a sense of calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced over the intercom, "we are currently handling a medical emergency involving the captain. A qualified pilot is assisting in the cockpit. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We will keep you updated." The announcement brought a wave of murmurs, but the knowledge that help had arrived seemed to ease some of the tension. Lauren, standing near the galley, watched the passengers nervously. Her usual confidence was nowhere to be found, replaced by a visible unease. She glanced toward the cockpit, the realization of the situation dawning on her. Jason, the man she had dismissed so easily, was now the plane's best hope for survival. Inside the cockpit, Jason worked seamlessly with the co-pilot. His hands moved with practiced precision as he adjusted the plane's altitude and heading. His voice was calm and measured as he relayed instructions, exuding the confidence of a seasoned professional. "Newark Liberty International is the closest airport with the facilities we need," Jason said after a brief exchange with air traffic control. "We'll begin our descent shortly. Notify the cabin crew to prepare the passengers for an emergency landing." The co-pilot nodded, his earlier panic giving way to focused determination under Jason's guidance. Reaching for the intercom, he made the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your co-pilot speaking. Due to a medical emergency, we will be making an unscheduled landing at Newark Liberty International Airport in approximately 25 minutes. Our guest pilot and I have the situation under control, but as a precaution, please follow all instructions from the cabin crew regarding emergency procedures. Thank you for your cooperation." The cabin erupted in a mixture of gasps and hushed prayers. Ethan and the other flight attendants sprang into action, moving through the aisles to demonstrate the braced position and ensure all loose items were secured. Lauren found herself on autopilot, her mind racing as she assisted an elderly couple. The weight of her earlier behavior pressed heavily on her. She glanced toward the cockpit, her gaze lingering on the door that separated her from the man she had wronged. In the cockpit, Jason remained fully focused. He worked in perfect sync with the co-pilot, their movements almost choreographed as they navigated through the turbulence. The aircraft had stabilized under Jason's control, and the shuddering was replaced by a smooth glide. "This is Flight 402. Jason spoke into the radio, declaring an emergency. "We have an incapacitated captain and are requesting immediate clearance for an emergency landing at Newark Liberty International. Current position, 40.7 north, 74.2 west. Flight 402, this is Newark Tower," came the steady reply. "You are cleared for runway 4R. Emergency vehicles are standing by. Winds at 10 knots from the northeast. Roger that, Newark Tower." "Beginning final approach," Jason replied, his voice unwavering. As the plane descended through the clouds, the lights of Newark came into view. Jason's focus sharpened, and his every movement was precise as he guided the aircraft closer to the runway. The co-pilot, now fully engaged, called out altimeter readings as they approached. 500 feet, 400, 300. Jason's hands made minute adjustments to compensate for a slight crosswind. 50 feet, 40, 30, 20. With a gentle bump, the wheels touched down and Jason deployed the spoilers and thrust reversers. The roar of the engines filled the cabin as the plane slowed rapidly. For a moment, Silence hung in the air as the plane came to a complete stop. Then, as the realization sank in, the cabin erupted in thunderous applause and cheers. Jason allowed himself a small smile, his grip on the controls finally relaxing. Beside him, the co-pilot let out a long breath, shaking his head in disbelief. "You saved us," the young man said, his voice trembling with gratitude. "I've never seen flying like that, especially under these conditions." Jason shook his hand firmly. "We did it together," he replied. "You kept your cool when it mattered most. That's what being a good pilot is all about." As the emergency vehicles approached the aircraft, Jason knew his role wasn't over yet. There were passengers to reassure, a shaken crew to steady, and a world of questions waiting outside the cockpit. But for now, he savored the quiet triumph of a successful landing, knowing he had done what he was born to do: lead, protect, and guide. The cabin buzzed with energy as the passengers erupted into applause and cheers. Jason's calm leadership and flawless landing had transformed fear into relief and gratitude. Even the most stoic passengers couldn't help but join in the celebration, their appreciation for the man who had taken control resonating throughout the aircraft. In the cockpit, Jason worked alongside the co-pilot to complete the post-landing procedures. His hands moved with practiced ease, shutting down the systems and ensuring the aircraft was secure. Despite the lingering adrenaline coursing through his veins, he maintained his usual composure. "Emergency crews are at the gate," the co-pilot said, his voice steady for the first time since the crisis began. "They'll take care of the captain." Jason nodded, glancing at the unconscious man in the captain's seat. Relief swept over him, as it knowing the captain would soon be in the hands of medical professionals. As the cockpit door opened, Jason stepped out to face a sea of grateful passengers. They craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the man who had saved their lives, their expressions a mix of awe and admiration. Many were on their feet, clapping and shouting words of thanks. "You're a hero," someone called out, their voice ringing above the applause. Jason offered a modest smile, nodding politely as he made his way into the cabin. He didn't seek the spotlight. He had simply done his job, a job he loved and took pride in. Amid the crowd, Jason's eyes fell on Lauren, standing near the galley. Her face was pale, and her usual confidence completely shattered. She seemed frozen in place, her gaze locked on Jason, as if she were seeing him for the first time. Passengers parted to let her through as she hesitantly approached Jason. Her hands trembled as she clutched the hem of her uniform, her expression a mix of shame and regret. Lauren began, her voice barely above a whisper. She paused, searching for the right words, but they didn't come easily. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her tone laden with emotion. "The way I treated you earlier, it was unacceptable. I made assumptions, and I was wrong." Jason studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. He could see the genuine remorse in her eyes, the weight of her earlier actions pressing heavily on her. "Thank you for your apology," Jason said evenly, his voice calm but firm. "I accept it, but I hope you understand that this goes beyond just me. The way you behaved reflects something bigger, a bias that affects many people every day." Lauren nodded, unable to meet his gaze. Her shame was palpable, and the onlookers seemed to hold their breath as the conversation unfolded. "It's crucial," Jason continued, his voice carrying through the cabin, "that we learn to judge people by their abilities and character, not by appearances or preconceptions. In a crisis, none of that matters. What matters is the ability to step up and do what needs to be done." The cabin fell silent as Jason's words sank in. His message wasn't just for Lauren, it was for everyone on the plane. The passengers, the crew, and even the management of the airline had witnessed a lesson in character and competence. Lauren nodded again, her voice trembling as she said, "You're right. I have a lot to reflect on." Jason offered her a small nod of acknowledgement before turning his attention to the passengers. Many of them were eager to thank him personally, forming a loose line in the aisle. One of the first was the elderly couple who had noticed Lauren's behavior earlier. The woman took Jason's hand in both of hers, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice quivering with emotion. "Because of you, we're going to see our grandson graduate next week. We owe you everything." Jason gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "I'm glad I could help," he replied gently. Next came a young mother holding the hand of her wide-eyed son. The boy looked up at Jason with awe, his small hand clutching a toy plane. "You're amazing," the mother said, her smile radiant. "My son hasn't stopped talking about how brave you are." The boy grinned, holding up his toy. "When I grow up, I want to be a pilot just like you." Jason knelt to the boy's level, his heart warmed by the child's words. "You can be anything you want to be," he said earnestly. "Just remember to work hard, be kind, and always believe in yourself." As the passengers continued to express their gratitude, Jason felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been far from ordinary, but it had brought out the best in people, even in those who had doubted him. Meanwhile, outside the aircraft, the emergency crew worked quickly to tend to the captain. Airline officials gathered on the jet bridge, including a distinguished-looking man in a sharp suit. When Jason finally stepped off the plane, the man approached him, extending a hand. "Mr. Clark," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "I'm David Martinez, Senior Operations Manager for the airline. On behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you for your extraordinary actions today. You saved not only the lives of everyone on board, but also the reputation of our airline." Jason shook his hand firmly. "I was just doing what needed to be done," he replied modestly. "The crew, especially the co-pilot, also deserves credit for their efforts." As Martinez continued to express his gratitude, a group of passengers approached with concerned expressions. Among them was a young woman holding her phone tightly, the screen glowing with a video paused at a revealing moment. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Martinez. "There's something you need to see." She played the video, which showed clips of Lauren's earlier behavior toward Jason. As Martinez watched, his expression darkened, the seriousness of the situation dawning on him. Lauren, who had quietly joined the group, looked visibly shaken. Her eyes darted between Jason and Martinez, her face pale as the weight of her actions caught up with her. "This is unacceptable," Martinez said firmly, turning to Lauren. "We need to have a discussion immediately." "Bookmark?" Lauren nodded, her voice barely audible. "I understand." Jason watched the scene unfold with a mix of emotions. He didn't revel in Lauren's downfall, but he hoped the experience would lead her to confront her biases and grow from them. Lauren stood frozen as David Martinez gestured for her to follow him to a quieter area near the gate. Her usual confidence had completely dissolved, replaced by visible fear and shame. The video presented by the young passenger captured her discriminatory actions in stark detail, leaving little room for denial. Passengers and crew looked on as Lauren slowly walked away, her head bowed. Jason turned his focus back to the remaining passengers, offering reassuring smiles and exchanging a few words of comfort. Although the situation with Lauren weighed on him, his priority remained the well-being of the people he had safely brought to the ground. Among the group was Ethan Perez, the young flight attendant who had gone out of his way to show kindness during the flight. He approached Jason with a mix of gratitude and guilt evident in his expression. "Captain Clark," Ethan began, his voice low, "I should have done more. I saw what was happening earlier and I stayed quiet. I didn't want to make things worse, but I realize now that silence isn't enough." Jason placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You acted with kindness when it mattered most," he said sincerely. "That takes courage. The important thing is learning from moments like these and knowing when to speak up next time." Ethan nodded, his resolve visibly strengthening. "Thank you," he said. "I won't forget this lesson." Nearby, David Martinez reappeared, his expression serious as he addressed Jason once more. "Mr. Clark, I wanted to let you know that we've taken immediate action regarding Lauren Taylor. She's been relieved of her duties pending further investigation and will ensure this matter is handled appropriately." Jason nodded. "I appreciate that. But this situation isn't just about one person. There's a larger issue at play, one that needs addressing on a systemic level." Martinez's brow furrowed as he listened. "You're absolutely right," he admitted. "We can't ignore what this incident represents. It's a wake-up call for all of us." At that moment, a small crowd began to gather near the gate, consisting of both media and curious onlookers who had heard about the dramatic landing. Reporters held microphones, their cameras trained on Jason, eager to capture the story of the heroic pilot who had stepped in during a crisis. One of the reporters, a woman with a sharp voice, called out, "Mr. Clark, can you tell us what happened on board? How did you manage to land the plane so smoothly?" Jason hesitated for a moment, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Stepping into the spotlight wasn't something he sought. Still, he understood the importance of addressing the situation thoughtfully. "I was simply doing what I've been trained to do," Jason replied modestly. "Flying is my profession, and in moments like these, it's about staying calm and focused to ensure everyone's safety." Another reporter interjected, "What about the allegations of discriminatory behavior by a crew member? Do you have anything to say about that?" Jason's expression remained composed as he answered, "What happened earlier on this flight highlights an issue that goes beyond this one incident. Bias and prejudice still exist in many forms, and it's our responsibility, both individually and collectively, to challenge those attitudes when we encounter them." His words struck a chord, prompting murmurs of agreement among the crowd. Back at the gate, Lauren was escorted away by an airline representative, her face pale and her movements subdued. Jason caught sight of her as she glanced in his direction, her eyes filled with a mixture of remorse and acknowledgement. Though the consequences she now faced were serious, Jason hoped the experience would lead her to meaningful growth. Inside the terminal, Jason was greeted by a wave of gratitude from the passengers. The elderly couple approached him again, their heartfelt words making an impression. "My wife and I have been through a lot in our lives," the older man said, his voice thick with emotion. "But today, you reminded us that there are people out there who rise above prejudice and show what true character looks like. Thank you." Jason smiled warmly. "I'm just glad everyone's safe," he replied. As Jason prepared to leave, David Martinez stopped him. "Mr. Clark," he began, "we'd like to extend our gratitude formally. We'll be reaching out to you soon with a proposal. The actions you took today, and the way you carried yourself, deserve to be recognized, and we'd like to discuss how we can work together to improve our organization." Jason raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not entirely surprised. "I'll keep an open mind," he said. "Let's talk soon." Walking through the terminal, Jason felt the weight of the day's events beginning to lift. The crisis had brought out the best and worst in people, but it had also provided an opportunity for reflection and change. As he neared the exit, a young woman with a determined stride approached him. She was the same passenger who had filmed the video of Lauren's behavior. "Mr. Clark," she said, her voice filled with conviction, "thank you for everything you did today. I hope this video helps bring about some real change. People need to see what bias looks like, and what courage looks like too." Jason nodded appreciatively. "It's not always easy to call out what's wrong, but it's necessary. Thank you for taking that step." The woman smiled, her resolve evident. "If more people stand up, maybe we'll get closer to the kind of world we all deserve." As Jason stepped out into the crisp evening air, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the day had been challenging, but they had also reaffirmed his belief in the power of character, resilience, and the potential for change. This flight had been far more than a journey between two cities. It had been a journey toward greater understanding and accountability. Jason knew that while the work ahead wouldn't be easy, it was work worth doing. As Jason left the terminal, the crisp night air brought a welcome sense of calm. He hailed a taxi and climbed into the back seat, the adrenaline of the day's events still coursing through him. His pilot's license, now tucked securely in his pocket, felt like a small but potent reminder of the day's triumphs and challenges. "Rough day, huh?" the driver asked, glancing at Jason in the rearview mirror. Jason chuckled softly, leaning back into the seat. "You could say that," he replied, not offering much detail. Moments later, his phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, and social media alerts filled the screen. Jason frowned, opening his Twitter app to find his name trending. The video recorded by the young woman on board had gone viral, showcasing both Lauren's discriminatory behavior and Jason's heroic actions in the cockpit. Thousands of comments flooded the thread. Many praised Jason's skill, courage, and calmness under pressure. Others condemned the airline for allowing such bias to exist within their ranks. One tweet from a prominent civil rights advocate stood out. Jason Clarke's story is a powerful reminder of why we must confront prejudice wherever it exists. His professionalism and bravery in the face of discrimination are a lesson for us all. Soar above bias. Jason scrolled through the comments, a mix of emotions washing over him. While he appreciated the outpouring of support, the sudden spotlight felt overwhelming. He had never sought attention. He preferred to let his actions speak for themselves. His phone buzzed again, this time with a call from his wife, Melanie. Jason answered immediately, her voice thick with emotion on the other end. "Jason, thank God you're okay," Melanie said, relief and worry mingling in her tone. "I just saw the news. Why didn't you call me?" "I'm sorry," Jason replied softly. "Everything happened so fast and I'm still trying to process it all. But I'm fine, I promise." Melanie took a shaky breath. "I'm so proud of you, Jason, but I'm furious about how you were treated. Are you sure you're all right?" Jason smiled, her steadfast support warming his heart. "I'm fine, Mel. We'll talk more when I get home, but thank you, I love you." As the call ended, the taxi driver glanced at Jason again, recognition dawning on his face. "Wait a minute," the driver said, his eyes widening. "You're the pilot from the news, aren't you? The one who landed that plane." Jason hesitated but nodded. "Yeah, that was me." The driver beamed, shaking his head in admiration. "Man, what you did was incredible. My brother-in-law was on that flight. He couldn't stop talking about how you saved everyone." Jason offered a modest smile. "I just did what I was trained to do." When the taxi pulled up to Jason's hotel, the driver refused payment. "It's an honor to drive a hero," he insisted, shaking Jason's hand firmly. Reluctantly, Jason accepted, offering a heartfelt thank you before heading into the hotel. At the reception desk, the night clerk did a double take, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "Mr. Clarke," she said, her voice filled with awe. "We've been expecting you. The manager upgraded you to our best suite, free of charge. Please, it's the least we can do after everything you've been through." Jason started to decline, but stopped himself. Too tired to argue, he accepted the key card with a grateful nod. The suite was luxurious, with a panoramic view of the city skyline. Jason stood by the window, gazing at the twinkling lights below. It was hard to believe that just hours ago he had been piloting a plane through turbulence, the lives of dozens of passengers in his hands. His phone buzzed again, this time with an email from David Martinez, the airline's senior operations manager. Subject: Gratitude and next steps. "Dear Mr. Clarke, I hope this email finds you well after today's extraordinary events. I wanted to personally inform you that our CEO would like to meet with you tomorrow morning to discuss how we can address the incident and improve our organization. Additionally, we've already decided to implement diversity and inclusion training across our company, effective immediately. Your actions and experiences have opened our eyes to the urgent need for systemic change. Please let us know if you're available to meet at 10 a.m. at our corporate headquarters. Once again, thank you for your courage, professionalism, and dedication. Sincerely, David Martinez." Jason read the email twice, his thoughts racing. While he was glad the airline was taking action, he also felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. His role in the coming days would be crucial, not just as a pilot, but as a voice for change. After replying to confirm the meeting, Jason finally allowed himself to rest. Exhaustion overtook him as he sank into the plush bedding, but sleep didn't come easily. His mind replayed the events of the day, the chaos, the landing, Lauren's tearful apology, and the passengers' gratitude. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were a chaotic mix of flashing lights, Lauren's remorseful face, and the cheers of passengers as the plane touched down safely. The next morning, Jason awoke to the sound of his phone ringing. It was Melanie again, calling to check in. "Our kids saw you on the news this morning," she said, her voice warm. Maya was so excited. She kept saying, "That's my dad. He's a hero." Jason's throat tightened. Maya, their 10-year-old daughter, had faced her own struggles with prejudice at school. Her pride in him meant everything. "Tell them I love them," Jason said softly, "and thank you, Melanie, for everything." After a quick breakfast, Jason headed to the airline's corporate headquarters. The events of the previous day had sparked a movement, and Jason was ready to ensure it would lead to meaningful change. Jason arrived at the airline's corporate headquarters, a modern glass structure that gleamed under the morning sun. The lobby was bustling, but his presence didn't go unnoticed. Whispers followed him as employees cast admiring glances, clearly recognizing him from the viral video that had swept social media overnight. A young intern approached him, her face lit with a mixture of awe and excitement. "Mr. Clark, it's such an honor to meet you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm here to escort you to the meeting room." Jason smiled kindly. "Thank you," he replied, following her to the elevator. The meeting room was located on the top floor, with a panoramic view of the airport in the distance. Inside, several executives were already seated around a polished table. Among them were David Martinez, who greeted Jason with a firm handshake, and Amanda Reeves, the airline CEO, a poised woman in her early 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Clark," Amanda said, stepping forward, "thank you so much for coming. What you did yesterday was nothing short of extraordinary. On behalf of the entire airline, I want to personally thank you for your bravery and professionalism." Jason shook her hand, noting the sincerity in her tone. "Thank you, Miss Reeves. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me." As everyone took their seats, Amanda opened the meeting by addressing the events of the previous day. "Let me start by saying that we are deeply embarrassed and appalled by the behavior of one of our employees," she began. "What you experienced was unacceptable, and it does not align with the values we claim to uphold. We're committed to ensuring that something like this never happens again." Jason nodded, but his gaze remained steady. "I appreciate your acknowledgement," he said, "but words alone won't solve this issue. What happened yesterday wasn't just about one person's actions, it reflects a deeper problem within the culture of this organization." The room fell silent as Jason continued. "Bias, whether conscious or unconscious, can have serious consequences, not just for employees, but for the passengers who trust you with their safety. Addressing this requires more than just disciplinary action. It demands systemic change." Amanda exchanged a glance with David, who nodded in agreement. "We couldn't agree more," she said. "In fact, that's why we've decided to take immediate steps. Starting next week, we'll be implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, from frontline employees to senior executives." Jason leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Training is a good start, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. You need to examine your hiring practices, your promotion policies, and the ways you foster inclusivity on a day-to-day basis." Amanda listened intently, her posture attentive. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Clark," she said. "We'd like to invite you to play a more active role in this process. Your perspective and experience would be invaluable." David chimed in. "We'd like to offer you a position as our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. It's a leadership role that would allow you to spearhead these initiatives across the company." Jason was taken aback. The offer was prestigious, but it also came with significant responsibility, and it would likely mean stepping away from his career as a pilot. "I'm honored," Jason began carefully, "but flying is my passion. It's where I belong. I'm not sure I'm ready to leave that behind." Amanda nodded, her expression understanding. "We anticipated that," she said. "In that case, we'd like to propose an alternative. A dual role, where you continue flying as a senior pilot while also serving as a diversity consultant. You'd have the opportunity to mentor younger pilots, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds, and help us build a more inclusive culture." Jason considered the offer. It struck a balance between his love for flying and his desire to make a meaningful impact. "That," he said after a moment, "is something I'd be interested in exploring further." A sense of relief swept through the room. The executives seemed genuinely committed to enacting change, and Jason felt cautiously optimistic that his involvement could help ensure their promises turned into action. As the meeting continued, Jason shared his insights, drawing from his own experiences to challenge the group to think beyond surface-level solutions. He emphasized the importance of accountability, transparency, and creating a workplace where all employees felt valued and respected. By the time the meeting concluded, Jason felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just addressing the events of one flight, he was helping to lay the foundation for a better future within the airline industry. As he left the building, Jason was surprised to find a small crowd of reporters waiting outside. Word of his meeting with the airline executives had apparently leaked, and they were eager for a statement. "Mr. Clark," one reporter called out, "how do you feel about the airline's response to yesterday's events?" Jason paused, recognizing the weight of his words in shaping the narrative. "The airline has acknowledged its shortcomings and committed to making meaningful changes," he said. "It's a step in the right direction, but the real work lies ahead. Accountability and follow-through are what will make the difference." Another reporter asked, "What are your thoughts on the flight attendant being fired?" Jason's expression remained composed. "While her actions were unacceptable, I hope this experience serves as a turning point for her. Growth and learning are possible, even after mistakes." His calm, measured responses resonated with both the reporters and the onlookers who had gathered nearby. "My hope," Jason concluded, "is that this incident sparks a broader conversation about bias and inclusion, not just in the airline industry, but across all sectors. We all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world." As Jason walked away, his phone buzzed with a text from Melanie. "Saw you on TV again. You were amazing. Proud of you, as always." Jason smiled, his resolve strengthened. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to embrace the challenge, not just as a pilot, but as a catalyst for change. In the weeks following the flight, Jason's life took on a new rhythm. The airline moved swiftly to implement the promises discussed in their meeting. Diversity and inclusion training became mandatory, and policies were updated to address systemic inequities. Jason played an integral role in shaping these changes, balancing his duties as a senior pilot with his new position as a diversity consultant. His story continued to resonate far beyond the airline. Invitations to speak at conferences, schools, and community events began pouring in. Jason wasn't just celebrated as a hero for landing the plane. He had become a symbol of resilience and the power of rising above prejudice. One particularly memorable moment came when Jason was asked to give a commencement speech at his alma mater, a small aviation academy where his dreams of flying had taken root. Standing at the podium before a sea of eager young graduates, Jason took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "When I sat where you are now," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I never imagined that one day I'd be standing here sharing my story with you. I certainly didn't expect to become a symbol of anything, let alone change." The room was silent, every eye fixed on him. "What I've learned," Jason continued, "is that life has a way of testing us in ways we don't anticipate. The question isn't whether challenges will come, they will. The question is how we respond to them." He recounted the events of the flight, not just the dramatic emergency landing, but the subtle, insidious discrimination he had faced beforehand. His words painted a vivid picture of the emotional and professional hurdles he had overcome and the values that had guided him through. "Each of you will face challenges," Jason said, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "Some of those challenges may stem from who you are, your race, your gender, your background. But remember this, the things that others see as your weaknesses are often your greatest strengths. They give you perspective, resilience, and the ability to push boundaries." By the time Jason finished his speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. As he stepped away from the podium, a young black woman approached him, her hands trembling as she clutched her program. "Mr. Clark," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm studying aerospace engineering. I've always dreamed of becoming a pilot, but sometimes it feels like the odds are stacked against me." Jason placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, looking her squarely in the eyes. "The skies belong to all of us," he said firmly. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If this is your dream, pursue it with everything you have. The world needs more pilots like you." The young woman nodded, her resolve renewed, and Jason felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Moments like this reminded him why he had taken on this dual role, not just to pave the way for others, but to inspire them to claim their space in the skies. Back at the airline, Jason's influence was beginning to show real results. Employees reported feeling a shift in the company's culture. The training programs Jason had helped design were receiving positive feedback, and more employees were stepping up to challenge discriminatory behaviors when they saw them. Ethan Perez, the young flight attendant who had supported Jason during the flight, became one of the program's strongest advocates. One afternoon, Ethan approached Jason in the crew lounge, his face alight with determination. "Captain Clark," Ethan said, "I just wanted to thank you again. After everything that happened, I've started speaking up when I see things that aren't right. It's not always easy, but I know now that silence isn't an option." Jason smiled, a surge of pride washing over him. "That's how real change happens, Ethan. One person, one action at a time. Keep at it." Even Lauren Taylor, the flight attendant whose actions had sparked the controversy, was undergoing her own transformation. After being terminated, Lauren had reached out to Jason through the airline, requesting a meeting. When they sat down together in a quiet coffee shop, Lauren looked like a different person. Humble, nervous, and visibly remorseful. "Mr. Clark," she began, her voice trembling, "I owe you more than an apology. Losing my job forced me to take a hard look at myself. And I didn't like what I saw. I've been working to understand where my biases came from and how to do better." Jason listened patiently as Lauren shared her journey, including the diversity training courses she had taken and her new role as a customer service representative at another company. "I don't expect forgiveness," Lauren said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I want you to know that you changed my life. I'm trying every day to be better because of what I learned from you." Jason regarded her with a thoughtful expression. "Lauren, the fact that you're here, taking responsibility and working to change, speaks volumes. Growth isn't about perfection, it's about progress." Lauren nodded, relief softening her features. "Thank you," she said. "If there's anything I can do to support your work, please let me know." Jason saw potential in Lauren's sincerity and suggested she share her story as a cautionary tale during future training sessions. Her willingness to confront her past and contribute to the conversation could make a powerful impact. As the months rolled on, Jason's work expanded beyond the airline. Inspired by his story, the company launched a scholarship program for aspiring pilots from underrepresented backgrounds. Jason was named the program's mentor, and the first cohort of recipients included a diverse group of young people with dreams as bright as the skies they aimed to conquer. On the day of the program's launch, Jason stood in the terminal surrounded by eager faces. As he spoke words of encouragement, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning, he saw Lauren, her expression hopeful. "I'm here to support the new pilots," she said, holding a folder of materials for the training sessions. Jason smiled, nodding approvingly. "Welcome aboard." At that moment, Jason realized that the flight had been far more than an isolated incident. It had become a catalyst for a movement that would ripple across the industry and beyond. 5 years had passed since the flight that changed everything. Jason stood in the bustling terminal of Newark Liberty International Airport, watching as the first group of scholarship recipients prepared for their inaugural training flights. The program he had helped establish was thriving. Each year, dozens of aspiring pilots from underrepresented backgrounds receive mentorship, funding, and the opportunity to pursue their dreams in aviation. Jason had taken on the role of lead mentor, balancing it alongside his duties as a senior pilot. The terminal buzzed with excitement as the young aviators gathered around their instructors. Among them, Jason recognized Elena Alvarez, a bright-eyed Latina woman who had spoken to him during one of the program's early sessions. "Bookmark, Captain Clark," Elena said as she approached, her face glowing with enthusiasm. "I just wanted to thank you again for everything. When I was a little girl, I never imagined someone like me could be a pilot. But because of you, I'm here. I promise I'll make you proud." Jason smiled warmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Elena, you're already making me proud. Remember, this isn't just about flying planes, it's about paving the way for the next generation. Keep leading the way." Elena nodded, her determination evident as she returned to join her group. Watching her go, Jason felt a surge of pride. These young pilots represented a future that once seemed impossible. A future where barriers were broken and dreams were accessible to all. Standing near the gathering was Ethan Perez, now a seasoned flight attendant and a key advocate for the program. Ethan had become one of Jason's closest collaborators, helping to develop initiatives that promoted inclusivity within the airline. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years, huh?" Ethan said as he approached, his voice filled with nostalgia. Jason chuckled. "Time flies, no pun intended." but it's incredible to see how far we've come." Ethan nodded, his gaze drifting toward the young aviators. "You've inspired a lot of people, Jason, myself included. This program wouldn't exist without you." Jason shook his head modestly. "It's not just me, it's everyone who's stepped up and committed to making things better. Change takes a team." As the young aviators began boarding their training planes, Jason noticed a familiar figure standing off to the side. Lauren Taylor. She was dressed in a smart blazer, holding a portfolio that bore the airline's logo. Jason hadn't seen her in over a year, but her presence here didn't surprise him. Lauren had become a diversity consultant, using her own story as a powerful tool for education and reflection. She approached Jason hesitantly, her expression a mixture of gratitude and nervousness. "Captain Clark," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I wanted to thank you again for giving me the chance to grow. Being part of these training sessions has been one of the most meaningful things I've ever done." Jason studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Lauren, seeing how far you've come is proof that change is possible. It's not about where we start, it's about where we choose to go." Lauren's face lit up with a smile, and she glanced toward the young pilots boarding their planes. "It's humbling to know that sharing my mistakes is helping them build a better future. Thank you for believing in that." As the planes began to taxi down the runway, Jason and Lauren watched in silence. The sight of the young pilots taking off into the sky was a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of second chances. Later that evening, Jason sat by a large window overlooking the airport. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the runways. He reflected on how much had changed since that fateful flight 5 years ago. The airline's culture had transformed. Inclusivity was no longer a buzzword, but a core value woven into every level of the organization. Employees from all backgrounds felt empowered to speak up, and passengers often commented on the welcoming atmosphere on board. Jason thought about his daughter, Maya, now a teenager. She often spoke of her father's story with pride, and it inspired her to stand up for herself and others. Jason knew that Maya, and countless others like her, would grow up in a world that was slowly but surely becoming more equitable. As he stared out at the twilight sky, Jason's phone buzzed with a message from Melanie. "How did it go today? I hope you're proud of everything you've built." Jason smiled, typing back a simple reply, "Better than I could have ever imagined. Can't wait to tell you all about it." A moment later, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning around, he saw Elena, her face beaming with excitement. "Captain Clark," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I just completed my first solo flight. I couldn't have done it without you in this program." Jason's chest swelled with pride. "Congratulations, Elena. This is just the beginning. Keep pushing forward. You've got an incredible journey ahead." As she walked away, Jason turned back to the window. The sight of planes taking off and landing filled him with a deep sense of contentment. His story, once a tale of prejudice and perseverance, had become a symbol of hope and progress. Jason knew that the work was far from over. There were still biases to confront, systems to change, and lives to uplift. But he also knew that every small step mattered, and every act of courage brought them closer to a world where everyone could soar. With a renewed sense of purpose, Jason rose from his seat, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For him, the sky was not the limit. It was just the beginning. The story of Jason Clark transcends the confines of a single flight, shining a light on the resilience of the human spirit and the potential for transformation in the face of adversity. What began as a tale of prejudice and subtle bias became a powerful narrative of redemption, courage, and change. It demonstrated that true character is revealed not in moments of ease, but in how we rise to meet challenges, even when others doubt us. Jason's actions exemplify the importance of staying true to one's values and abilities, no matter the obstacles. His quiet dignity and steadfast professionalism not only saved lives, but also sparked a ripple of reflection and accountability that reached far beyond the cabin. Through his story, we are reminded that one person's determination to rise above bias can ignite a movement toward greater inclusivity and justice. The narrative also offers a profound lesson in the power of second chances. Lauren Taylor's journey from prejudice to accountability showcases that growth and change are possible, when we confront our biases and work to improve ourselves. Her transformation underlines the importance of humility and the willingness to learn from our mistakes. In the end, Jason's story is more than a story of heroism. It's a call to action for all of us to recognize the biases that exist in our hearts and systems, and to work toward dismantling them. It's a reminder that small acts of courage, whether it's speaking up, offering support, or simply treating others with respect, can lead to meaningful change. If this story moves you, we want to hear your thoughts. Was it inspiring? If you thought the story was good, comment with a 1. If you thought it was amazing, comment with a 2. And don't hesitate to share your own stories of overcoming adversity or inspiring others. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more powerful and meaningful stories like this one. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Together, we can create a world where everyone has the chance to soar.